Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of the Madrassah, the show where we discuss issues related to the contemporary Shia Madrassah, wherever it shows itself. As we do, we are going to recap and use our recapping as a bridge to now explore new knowledge related to professionalism within the Shia Madrassah, because that is the topic of our discussion. It's been the topic of our discussion for the past 3 episodes, and it will continue to be the topic of discussion for a few more, inshallah. So, in our last session, we were looking at professionalism, how it manifests itself within the Shia Madrassah, its contours, its contents. What does it actually look like? Is it tangible? Can we grasp it? Can we readily identify it when we see it and we say, yes, that's an aspect of professionalism with regards to a particular teaching faculty's teaching practice? Because remember, we never teach alone. We always teach as members of a faculty of teachers, of highly motivated teachers. And our teaching is linked into the teaching of our faculty members, so that what we actually do is we manifest a united face representation of teaching as it manifests itself based upon an Islamic ethos of teaching. So our teaching as a faculty is professional. Not only as an individual is our teaching professional. We sink or we swim all together, and we aid one another in our professionalism. So one of the aspects of this professionalism, which was touched on in our last session, if you can recall, was planning, learning. And related to planning of learning was the producing of detailed schemes of work which outline and the scenario was a 12-week program of study. And in each week it's detailed what topic will be touched on, or which topics will be touched on week by week. And we said closely related to the scheme of work is the lesson plan or the session plan. And the lesson plan or session plan is a detailed, much more detailed piece which allows us to record our aims, our objectives, and the differentiation which we are going to be involved in with regards to our teaching. One point which was not raised was with regards to resources. In our lesson plan, we could have, and it's good practice to have, a section in the lesson plan which details the resources which we are going to be using in that particular session. And remember that session by session or lesson by lesson, each lesson plan as it relates to the aims and objectives, as well as the differentiation, as well as the resources, are going to be different in some way. Again, this is a manifestation of our professionalism within the contemporary Shia Madrassah. But we'll come back to resources in a moment when we touch on the enabling of learning with regards to professionalism within the contemporary Shia Madrassah, inshallah. So, like any good teacher, we recap, and what's just been done, and I'm sure you'll notice, is a recapping of the previous episode. And in our teaching, we can factor into each lesson or session plan with regards to the minutes that are allocated within that lesson or session plan. At the beginning, 5 or 10 minutes of recapping the previous lesson, so that the learners are now aware of what was discussed previously, and those learners who are absent are aware of what was discussed previously, as well as serving as an aide memoire to those learners who were there the previous week also. So, using that then as a bridge, we'll move on to the next aspect of professionalism within the Shia Madrassah. And that is the aspect of enabling of learning. And that's where we left off in the last episode. Enabling of learning. And this aspect of professionalism shows itself in a variety of ways. And these are ways that we, as conscientious, professional practitioners within the contemporary Shia Madrassah, we should be aware of. And not only should we be aware of, we should try and incorporate within our practice. It can only make our practice better, and it can only, inshallah, make the learning process for the students much more richer, much more engaged, much more dynamic, because that's what our teaching is about. Our teaching is all about dynamism, engaging our learners and encouraging them within their acquisition of knowledge, which ultimately leads to a greater appreciation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, enabling of learning. And as was mentioned, when the lesson or session plan was being discussed in the recap, was that the aspect of resources is very important. So with regards to our enabling learning, we utilize as professionals a wide range of resources, and within the lesson plan a section is dedicated to resources which we are going to be using within that particular session, keeping in mind that the resources change with regard to the aims and objectives that we have from session to session or lesson to lesson. And it's clear that some madrassas are more able to provide a wider range of resources for the teaching faculty. But nevertheless, even if we have just a whiteboard or a blackboard, and I'm sure, given some of the emails that we've been receiving with regards to this show, there are some madrassas which are struggling with regards to resources, and some don't even have a blackboard to use. But whatever you do have to use, you use it in a way which shows that you have planned for learning. So even if we have only paper and pen as a resource, then we use the paper and pen in the most effective manner we can. And that takes for us to stand back and think about the use of the paper and pen before entering in to the lesson itself. Think of how can we use that paper and pen to most effectively transfer knowledge from ourselves. But don't stop there. We have a dry run with regards to the paper and pen. So 3 days, a week, 2 weeks prior to the session, the night before the session. But the most important thing is, before we enter into the session, we go through a rehearsal of how we are going to use that very limited resource which we have. And we give ourselves enough time to reflect on the usage of that resource so that we can tailor the use of the resource to best suit the needs of our learners and get the most out of that individual resource. So may Allah Azza wa Jal bless those individuals who are struggling with limited resources, and inshallah allow us as a global Shia community to constantly work to strengthen the madrasa wherever it is, with our financial support as well as our personal support. So let's move from that scenario where there are limited resources to a scenario which, fortunately, many madrasas are experiencing. And that's a scenario where there are a number of resources available to the faculty so that they can engage in interactive and inclusive teaching. So what would those resources be? What would they look like? Well, typically they could be a computer which has a projector which allows now for PowerPoint presentation. It could be that the faculty has the use of a whiteboard, an interactive board, or a blackboard. It could be that the faculty and you, the teacher, have use of a number of textual resources, that you may have flashcards, that you may have puzzles and other sorts of resources available for you to use. Regardless of the resource, what the resource needs is planning to be used before the session begins, so that we ensure that knowledge is transferred from us to our learners in an effective and empowering manner. So planning the utilization of resources prior to the entry into the classroom is another aspect of professional practice within the contemporary Shia Madrassah, wherever it is. And this type of practice typifies us. It is something that we need to embrace, and not only embrace, but constantly refine for our own particular teaching practice. The other aspect of enabling learning within a particular session is when we look at the size of the groups that we are teaching. Now, some of us, I'm aware, are very hard pushed, but with the hard pushing comes ingenuity and dynamism. And again, many of our madrassas, both here in England and abroad, are typified by dynamism and ingenuity of the teachers on the ground. So some classes I've witnessed have over 40 children in them. And there's one teacher in the class to the 40 children. How is a teacher going to enable learning in that scenario where there are competing needs of learners on the ground? Well, the teacher might, if time allows, divide the class into smaller sizes. That is, if the teacher is given 1 hour to teach, what could take place is that the teacher could engage that class, let's say the class of 40 students. The teacher could engage one group of the 40, let's say 20 students, in a particular task suited to their needs on the ground, whilst engaging the remaining 20 in another task best suited to their needs. So in delivery, in enabling the learning, the teacher is differentiating on the ground between this large group that they are presented with, and they are allocating a particular task to one group within the session and another task to another group within the session. But what is crucial here is this, that both groups are constantly engaged throughout the session itself. So the first group may be engaged in work which takes them 10 to 15 minutes to complete. It could be work which requires a written answer. It could be work which requires a multiple choice answer. It could be work in the form of a quiz. It could be work with regards to colouring in some kind of patterns which relate to, let's say, Hajj, or relates to the performance of Salah, or relates to the performance of fasting. It can be a wide range of activities which the students are asked to engage in, whilst the other group are then engaged in a task which is, again, more suitable to their needs on the ground at that moment in time. So the size of the group is taken into consideration, but also what is extremely important is this, that the size of the group does not daunt us, that in our professionalism we are able to cope with the size of the group in the resources which we use and how we engage that group on the ground within the individual session. That's ideal. However, the reality on the ground is that those 40 children in the class are talking, are engaged in other activities. Some are very engaged in what's being delivered, whilst others are not so engaged because their abilities are not to the level of those who are fully engaged. Well, how do we deal with them? And that will be addressed in detail, inshallah, in episodes that will be solely dedicated to those issues of classroom direction rather than classroom management, and meeting the needs of a diverse student body. We have a number of episodes, inshallah, which are going to be dedicated to those issues. So size of group, understanding the size of group, understanding the need of the group is extremely important in our professional practice. Likewise, the time span of sessions. Now, with regard to the time span of sessions, what can we actually achieve in that particular session? Yes, we have the ideal of the lesson plan, and as was mentioned, that the lesson plan is divided into particular sections, and one of those sections relates to the time which we allot to each particular portion of knowledge that we are going to effectively transfer from ourselves to our learners. But the real world of teaching is not always neat and tidy. Sometimes there are glitches. So with regard to the time span of sessions in relation to transference of the knowledge that we hold to our learners, how do we use it to enable learning? What do we do to effectively use that time as teachers on the ground? And again, that is going to be addressed in detail in up and coming episodes, inshallah. Really, the aim which I had in this episode was to give you an overview. So the objective which I have is that you are able now to say, within the professional practice of a madrassah teacher, there are certain key factors which typify this professionalism, and I'm sure you're able to enumerate them adequately, inshallah. Along with this understanding of time span, size of groups, and resources which we are to use as professional teachers, is the carrying out of induction. And what does that mean? Well, before the beginning of the course of study, it doesn't matter which level it is, whether we're teaching in the primary, whether we're teaching in the junior, whether we are teaching in the senior sections of the madrassah. What is very helpful, not only for the learner but ourselves as well, is to induct the learner into the program of study, to explain to the learner what is going to be taking place over the 12-week period of time which they are going to be coming to the madrassah. And if we can, to also allow the parents of our learners to be inducted also, so that our parents, because they are ours, our parents are also able to know, well, what is actually being taught to my child within the madrassah. And this also empowers not only the learner, but it also empowers the parent as well. And maybe the parent, after having been inducted as well, is able to say, well, with regards to this body of knowledge, I'm able to assist. And they may offer their assistance within a particular class or within the madrassah as a whole. The madrassah, remember, is a manifestation of the community. And because it's a manifestation of the community, we need to also include the parents as much as possible, so that induction into a program of study is also an aspect of professionalism within the modern Shia madrassah. On that note, we'll stop for a break and bi'idhnillah return. Shukran jazilan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.